Hello, everyone, everywhere. This is Pastor Robert Thibodeau. Welcome to On the Air Training Video. Today, this is video number 9. And today, our subject is going to be length really does matter. Now, despite all the controversy, and I've interviewed a lot of people, and the consensus is, yes, length of your podcast does matter. The length does matter. Get your head out of the gutter. Amen. Now, that being said, there needs to be some consistency to your podcast. There's nothing more worse to a listener than jumping on your podcast during lunch because he or she believes they can listen to the entire thing during their 30-minute lunch break, only to find out that instead of your podcast, which has been running 15, 20 minutes, today it's 55 minutes. Or if today's 55 minutes, the next one's 12. And the next one after that's 22. And the next one after that's 45. And, you get it. You should run your podcast professionally enough that you're fairly consistent in the length of the program. And does that mean that everyone has to be 27 minutes and 30 seconds exactly? No. Not usually. Now, if you're using your podcast as a radio program, which some of us do, the rules for length of radio programs vary from station to station, especially for traditional radio. But 27:30 is fairly common for a half-hour program because they have to leave space for commercials. And I know with our online radio station, Evangelism Radio, I have a time limit for our broadcasters. It's between 26:30 and 27:30 with some special occasions that might go, I'll allow it to go 28 minutes. But I will usually even allow one or maybe two times to go over. But if it's becoming a consistent problem, then I just cut it off. I just cut off the last part of the program. Well, when I first started, I would go through and edit out silence. And then where they pick up again, I'd edit out that silence. I'd edit out coughing and all of the ahs and ums and things like that in an attempt to help the broadcaster to get it in under the time limit. I mean, the hosting platform that we were using at the time had hard breaks for their commercials placed at the end of programs, and they needed that 2 minutes. So if I did not edit the program, they just cut it off and put in their commercials. And I had the time to do that when I only had, 7, 8, 9, 10 broadcasters submitting files. I could do that over the course of a week. But now, with 40-plus broadcasters and still growing, I don't have the time to do that. And I've spelled out the time constraints very clearly in the broadcaster contract. So now I just cut them off at the end. I'll scan their file, and if there's huge time blanks of silence, 10 seconds I usually skip over, but 15, 20, 25 seconds for whatever reason, I'll go in and cut that out and see if that helps. It definitely helps for airplay, but I don't go through it as in depth and cut out the ahs and ums and coughing. I don't have time to listen to every program in that capacity. So I just go to the end, and if they're 47 seconds over the time limit and I still got a 60-second close that has to be added, I just back up 2 minutes and cut it off. That's just the way it is. And the end is where all of the contact information is for the programs. On the radio program, on the podcast that I do, you'll hear the intro take 30 to 40 seconds. That's, who this is, who you're listening to, and the name of the program. But then at the end is, you've been listening to this, and if you have questions or you want to contact us, then this is the contact information, That gets cut off now. And if you submit it to a radio station, I guarantee a traditional radio station, their computers will automatically, as ours do, servers automatically cut the program at the end and go to the next thing, usually a commercial. So you have to be professional in that, okay? Now, I got off a little bit into managing a radio station. That'll come a little more in-depth in the future. on a future training program that we're doing here with On the Air. But it's also important for those who only have a podcast, because a podcast is a radio program, but on the internet. It may not be a 24/7 station. It could be, but most podcasts are not. But your website is your radio station, if you want to think of it like that. If someone visits your site or visits your podcast on iTunes or whatever, and they see, like I said, one program, an hour and 12 minutes, the next one 35, the next one 55, the next one 12, that shows that there is inconsistency in the production aspect of the podcast. Now, like I said, you don't need every single one to be exactly the same length. It should be, I would say, usually within probably 5 minutes or so of your podcast time. You want your listeners to tune in and listen, knowing they will listen for the entire program. Well, that's really what we'd like them to do anyway. Then the only way to do that is if they are positive that they can fit it into their schedule. And that's the key. It's their schedule you are attempting to influence, not your schedule. Your schedule is set. I'm recording this when I have made time on my schedule to do it. And I'm doing it knowing that you only have a few minutes that, these training programs, you don't want to sit here and listen to me ramble on for an hour. I want to make a distinct point to train you in this, to give you the information in this. We haven't really got over into the training aspect. That's coming in a couple more videos. But you want the information contained in the title. And in order to get that, you need to know that I'm not going to ramble on for half an hour or so. Okay? I mean, you will be interviewing really interesting guests. And if your interview goes over what your traditional recording length is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And how you handle that is you split your interview into two parts and load them as part 1 and part 2. Now, here's a trick for you that I've learned and used over the years, especially when it's handling radio. Let's say your normal podcast is a half-hour program and you make it traditionally 28 minutes long. But this interview, your guest is so interesting that it lasts 45 minutes. Do you have one part that's 28 minutes and the next part is 17 minutes? No, don't do that. Unprofessional podcasters will be tempted to do so because it's so easy. Just slide over, cut it, and then you got 2 sections. Don't go for easy. Go for professional. Split the podcast at the 28-minute part for part 1. And again, that doesn't have to be exactly 28 minutes. When I do that, I listen for the completion of a thought towards the end of the program. It might be 27 minutes and 5 seconds that I cut part 1. But at that normal transition point, as the end of a point is being made and before the presentation of a new thought, cut it. So it's a complete thought as your listeners are tuning in and listening or downloading and listening. Now for part 2, you go to the end of the podcast, the end of the program, and back up to the 28-minute mark. And then scan and listen for the beginning of a new thought. So, you have part 1 being 28 minutes and 15 seconds. Part 2 may be 27:35. It may be 28, 10, or it could be at the 28:15 mark. Well, you wouldn't do that because you back up to, I'm getting my ideas confused here. You back up from the 28-minute mark to the 17-minute mark. So it may be 17 minutes exactly. It may be at the 17:20 mark. It may be at the 16:15 mark. You see what I'm saying? But it's right in that ballpark figure where it's going to be 28 to 30 minutes long when everything is said and done. It's important. It is very important to keep your podcast time consistent. Length does matter. Okay. Now I use the half-hour program. You can use the same concept for an hour podcast or a 15-minute podcast. I mean, consistency is best. you need to stay within 5 minutes anyway on your podcast time. Like I said, radio station programs, they're even tighter on their time limit. But for a podcast, you need to stay within a 5-minute time frame of the length of your program for each and every one. Length does matter in your podcast as well. Amen. So this is Pastor Robert Thibodeau. I want you to remember that you need to be blessed in all that you do.